Okay. So we have started the webinar, and for those who are just joining us, please give us 1 minute so we allowed everyone to join us. We're also trying to start our live stream, and we'll get started shortly. So Anika, if you are able to start the live stream, that'll be great. Just give me a heads up. Hello, everyone. As you are joining, we're just going to allow 1 more minute for everyone to join the webinar, and we'll get started with the presentation, introductions. Awesome. So the live stream has started. We're gonna get started as well. And I'm just so happy to welcome everyone to the Live from the Studio with Marion Landry. Today, we're gonna have our intern, Anika Hoffman, introduce the event. Anika has been working with us this past summer as the Marketing and Public Programs Assistant, and we're very excited for her for you to know her. And yeah, I'll see you in the Q&A. My name is Fauni Barra. I'm the Public Programs and Residency Coordinator, and I'll be chatting with Marion. And Anika, please join us.
Hello, everyone. Thank you, Fauni. It's great to see you all here today. It has been an absolute pleasure to work with the Griffin team over the past 4 months, and I want to thank them all for helping me learn and grow as an assistant, an artist, and as a person. Over my time here, I have had the wonderful opportunity to watch our artist in residences processes and to see their works progress firsthand, which is why I am so thrilled to have the honor of introducing you to artist in residence, Marion Landry. Before we begin, we would like to acknowledge that our work takes place on the traditional, ancestral, and unceded territories of the Tsleil-Waututh and Squamish peoples. We are deeply grateful to undertake our work here. We are grateful to the Freybe Foundation and North Vancouver Recreation and Culture for their ongoing support of all of our programs. We acknowledge the BC Arts Council for their generous support of Griffin Art Project's residency programs. The Open Studio, featuring Griffin and Emily Carr University Studio Award winner Marion Landry, is organized in partnership between Griffin Art Projects and Shumka Center at Emily Carr University of Art and Design, brought to you by RBC. If you would like to see live captions displayed for today's presentation, you can enable this by selecting the CC Live Transcription button at the bottom of your screen. Please note that not all names will be accurate, but we can hope they can capture most of the conversation. We are also recording this webinar, and it will be published with revised captions at a later date. If you can check out our digital archive to find this recording, as well as past public programs, including artist talks, exhibition tours, and more. If you are experiencing any technical issues with the Zoom interface, we will also be live streaming today's event on Griffin Art Project's Facebook page, so you can watch from there as well. Lastly, I'll mention there will be a Q&A section moderated by Fauni at the end of this event. So if at any point throughout the presentation you have a question for our presenter, do feel free to type it in the Q&A dialog box below. You can also choose to raise your hand to ask your question live. We won't be able to see you, but we'll hear your voice. Please note that this event is being recorded. So if you choose to ask a question live, your voice will be recorded too and become of our digital archive. Without further ado, I'll introduce the Griffin and Emily Carr University Studio Award recipient, Marion Landry. Marion Landry's practice is grounded in a phenomenological approach, which emphasizes the embodied experience through the process of painting. By incorporating the concept of expanded field of painting into her practice, Landry creates site-adjusted installations that utilize light, temperature, and traditional painting techniques to create immersive experiences. The geometrical compositions of her paintings draw upon iconic optical strategies, such as chromatic vibrations, hard-edged forms, and geometrical composition, positioning her work in dialogue with, but not defined by, the tenets of modernist abstraction. These echoes aim to open possibilities for exploring and interrogating the potentialities of abstraction today. Landry earned her BFA in 2016 and MFA in 2023 from Carr University of Art and Design and has participated in exhibitions across Canada and abroad since 1999. Her career as a 3D architecture visualization specialist informs the way she observes, organizes, and translates the pictorial plane. Landry is a francophone originally from Montreal. She now lives and produces her work on the ancestral and unceded territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh Nations in Vancouver, BC. And now we will hear from Marion about her work.
Awesome. Thank you so much for the introduction, Anka and Pauni. I'm going to share my screen and start my presentation. Okay, so welcome everybody. I am recording this session here live from the studio. You can see some of my painting in the background and you can see the residency from outside on that picture. So the presentation today, Annika already did the acknowledgement, which I'm very grateful to be here on the land of the Tsleil-Waututh and Squamish Nation. And it was an honor to be able to produce this body of work on their land. She already mentioned a little bit about me, so you'll find out more about that today. And I'm going to talk in depth about my project proposal that I have initially envisioned here at the Griffin Art Project. I'll talk about my research, the painting production, and the site-specific installation that will be on display next Sunday during my open studio, but also highly documented on Instagram if you're not able to come in person. So I want to specify something about research. My research is an embodied research. It's not a research where I sit in the library and read book, although there is a component of that, obviously, as part of the research, but most of it is an embodied research. So I am in the element, I'm biking around, I'm smelling the smell, I'm feeling the atmosphere and the environment that I am. So I spend a lot of time around the residency to really understand the context and the surrounding of the residency. And I also spend a specific amount of time looking at the studio and studying the specificity of the studio. So we are located in North Vancouver, the Griffin Art Project is, and it's in a low industrial area. And you see in green is the bike path that I was taking from Vancouver using the Lions Gate Bridge and biking along the Spirit Trail, which is actually in front, directly in front of the Griffin Art Project. The area that I focused on, or at least that kind of captured my interest, which were kind of the boundaries from which I limit my research, was the Lions Gate Bridge, the Squamish Nation Indian Reserve number 5, which the bike path goes on the boundary of it and not through it because that's a private land. On the waterfront, that's also a private land, so that's C-SPAN, so it's a private company. And then we have the low industrial area, which is in pink, which is the area where the Griffin Art Project is. So low industrial is like 2 or 3 story building, a lot of body shop for Carr, you know, all sorts of different kind of shops around here, which is an area that I kind of enjoy because most of the artist studio are normally located in that kind of area. So it's a little bit more chaotic. There's all sorts of rubbish you can find around and things that are of interest for artists. And then the limit that I see as the green belt limit of the Griffin Art Project is the McKay Creek, which I spend quite a bit of time exploring. So the McKay Creek is an area that they kept green. So you can, there's a path, you can take the path to walk along it. And they also are spending considerable amount of time and energy trying to restore it to its initial beauty with the native plants and stuff like that. So here's a photo of the Lions Gate Bridge, which I was taking on a daily basis to commute to the Griffin residency, which I have to say was quite empowering to find myself at the top of the bridge on the bike, which was a first time for me. And then this is the C-SPAN. So I don't know what the C-SPAN land looks like. It's a private access. I don't get to go there. But the thing that I see every single day is that massive crane, which kind of like define the landscape or the seascape or whichever kind of environment that you're looking. Every time you're looking towards the water, you see this big crane, which kind of became part of my subconscious. You see on the left side, this is the view from the door of the residency, and you see the spirit trail that is exactly in front of it, and you see the C-SPAN crane as well. Here's the McKay Creek, which is a beautiful area that they're trying to restore, and there's lots of information about that, which was quite inspirational. And I also follow, as far as I could, the McKay Creek, the path of the creek, and it goes underneath the highway and onto the other side. Now, when you get to the upper McKay Creek, there is a pedestrian path, which I wasn't able to access on the bike because it was too steep, but it led to this Murdo Fraser Park, which is beautiful pond, tiny little pond, and a log cabin that was built around the same time that the Lionsgate Bridge was built, which is the late 1930s. And I found that it was quite mesmerizing because I had no idea about this. It was very close to the highway. It's in the middle of a residential area, and it was extremely beautiful. And I spent quite a bit of time sitting by that pond and observing the environment around me. And there's also the highway that kind of closes in the boundary. So through these experiences, what I was noticing a lot is that it felt like the area was very squeezed in and narrow, especially on the Pacific Spirit Trail. When you go in between the Squamish Nation and the C-SPAN, it's just a very narrow corridor that allows me to access the Spirit Trail path that goes along Welsh Avenue. And this idea of like being squeezed in or being triangulated in between different areas and different tension, different zones started to really enter my mind. We also had a fabulous, my residency started in July, and we had a fabulous July, lots of very saturated color, twilight, very little clouds in the horizon. And we had very spectacular evenings of sunset with very yellow and deep yellow color on a blue twilight sky. When the first week that I was in the residency, what I did mostly is sat in the studio space. So I was allocated studio number 2. When you enter the residency, there's the first studio, which was taken over by another artist, and my studio, and then you continue on to the kitchen. So you arrive through this common corridor and common path. So I moved in a little couch and spent a lot of time observing the light of the studio and really understand what the condition of the studio were. And there was something that I found quite interesting, is that the far window read as bluer than the other window. It felt like the light that was coming through that window was a bit bluer. So at first I thought, maybe the window is dirty, I'm gonna wash it. So I spent time washing the window. It didn't change anything. And I was really puzzled by that. And one day I was talking on the phone, leaning over the window, and I noticed that there was something peeling from the window. So I continued on peeling it and realized that the window had a film applied to it. It was most likely installed to block the light or to block some of the light coming in the studio. So once I peeled it off, I was able to evaluate the lighting of the studio kind of more based on the actual color of the sun, as opposed to filtered by this film. Now, note also that I've never worked in the studio under artificial light. I was really focusing on natural light because we are summer and there's lots of beautiful natural light coming in, and it was bright enough for me to work in. So those were the conditions that I was really working with. But this experience of the film kind of sparked an idea with me. I was been using a lot of gels to control, or I want to say calibrate the lighting condition when I'm working under artificial light. So I thought, what happened if I put these gels in the window? What would it do to the space? What it will do to the me seeing through this gel? So I started to play with these gels and really observe what these gels were doing to the gallery. to the studio, sorry. I also spent a lot of time documenting the light path, tracing the light path that was coming in the window. So at this point, I only had the orange gels in the window, and I noticed that because I was playing only with the orange, it wasn't making much difference. But the minute I start using blue in combination to the orange, which is a more contrast color, then I really start seeing the impact of the orange. Somewhat, I needed the contrast of the blue in order to be able to perceive the color. Then I also take time to see if the light would actually hit the wall at some point. I was hoping that it would hit the wall, but it never really did during the day. I had access to the residency until about 8 p.m. And I had to actually place my camera to record the light path on the wall. So you see me leaving the studio now. So this is past 8 o'clock and we have late evening in the summer. The sun goes down around 9:30. So I was able to document the light path while I was gone and really see which part of the wall it was encompassing and also what it would do, what kind of color tone would I get. And this light that I'm tracing is actually not gel. This is the actual color of the sunset. So you see that it gets quite color as the days goes by. I think that Phony put the link of the video in the chat. In case it's not working for you, you can look at the playlist. There's actually 3 videos that I'm going to be showing in this presentation, and they're all available on my YouTube channel. Another section of the residency that I paid close attention to was the landing. So when you enter the residency, you arrive through a flight of stairs, a landing, and another flight of stairs. And in that landing, there's this beautiful window with a frosted section and clear section. So when the light goes through the clear section, you see this very narrow path of light, which I thought was quite interesting. And I started to also notice that there was quite a bit of blue in this light as well. And I thought, this is interesting. So I was interested in perhaps painting the wall, doing an intervention in this space. But because I'm here only 2 months, this space was quite large. Painting it would have been quite taking quite a bit of time, and I would have had to repaint it white at the end. So it was a bit challenging. So I thought, how else can I paint this wall? So I came up with this idea of installing colored paper on the floor, which would allow the light to bounce on it and therefore paint the wall. So this is kind of what I refer to the expanded field of painting. So it's painting using a different technique than pigment and brush marks. So I used this paper, but still having that paper there, I could see the pink, but it felt like I needed in the window, a contrasting color in order to see and perceive it stronger. So I started to use blue on the landing where we're actually stepping on the blue paper. And by using those 2 colors, then the pink became really visible. So it was kind of a way for me to immerse myself in the color, to transition myself into color by using the landing as a transition into the studio. I was also observing the light path quite a bit, and this kind of shape, which is a parallelogram, which kind of started to really enter my mind at this point. You see here close up on the pink and the window frame. And something that I find interesting is that, and might not be that visible in the digital documentation, is that the shadow started to be tinted this very fluorescent green, which I wasn't expecting at all, which I thought was quite interesting. So if you come to the open studio, the paper will be installed and you'll be able to experience this phenomena on your own as well. The other thing that I started to notice was that when I was transitioning from Studio 1, which now was standing more as a blue studio, in comparison to my studio that was being tinted with the gel installed in the window. So I could see the pinkish tone of my studio when I was standing in the other studio, because there was, again, a comparison or a contrast of color from blue to pink. When you're standing in the studio itself, in my studio, with the color gel, it becomes hard to perceive the color of the gel because there's no contrast around you. So you kind of need the contrast in order to perceive the color. And I started to also focus on shapes and really observe the shapes of my environment. So you see that when I was taking the Lionsgate Bridge, you see this big triangle that's present. You see the rhombus shape that's underneath the Lionsgate Bridge. When I took over the pedestrian path to go to the upper McKay Creek, I saw this shadow from the railing that was giving me these very narrow path that I was experiencing while biking. You can also see the C-span triangle from the crane. There's this narrow path of light that I'm observing from the landing. There's this parallelogram shape that I'm observing that is migrating in the studio space and expanding as the day go by. So this shape became really the shape that I wanted to work with for the series of painting. So at first, I started to experiment with composition, shapes, thinking about how would I deal with the composition of the canvas itself. You see that I did a series of composition using gel. The angle weren't what I was after, but I was more thinking in that concept about compositing and kind of weaving these shapes or these intrusion of light together. You see a series of sketches as well that started to become closer to what you will see in the painting series. And as mid-July started, I started to paint and figure out what color I would work with. I had established the gradient of color that I wanted to work with, which were the color that I had observed in the environment. So there was the pink, the orange, the yellow, crossing over with the green going into the blue, which was very present in the environment, the sky, the nature, and the ambiance of the studio. So this was the gradient of color that I wanted to work with. And the rest, I had to figure out which pigment would represent these colors. So you see me mixing and exploring with the pigments, trying to reproduce these painting live in the studio. I'm really looking at the light going through the studio here and really trying to reproduce these in using pigment. I am using oil, so it's a bit of a slow process, obviously. So when you do exploration, you have to do a bunch of tests to really figure it out. So by mid-July, I was able to start painting. When I started painting production, I always do a series of smaller paintings, which will allow me to test the color, test the composition, really understand what kind of medium I'll be using. Am I going to be working with a matte medium or more of a glossy medium? Do I want the canvas to reflect the light, to absorb the light? What kind of composition I'm after? So I'll do all of that through a series of painting. You notice that my painting are not stretched on a regular stretcher. They are actually stretched directly on the wall. I use cardboard to make sure that I have a smooth surface and plastic. And then I stretch the canvas on the wall. And the reason for that is because I don't use any tape in my geometrical composition. It's all traced by hand and freehand painted. So I need an actual hard surface to be able to trace, as opposed to a bouncy surface if the canvas would be stretched on a canvas. Then you see the beginning of the production of painting, and I wanted to isolate the color that I would be working with. So you see the blue, the yellow, the orange migrating into the pink, which were the foundation color that I wanted to work with for this series. And I also did another test using all of these colors within one canvas. And it was interesting when I did that, because it was kind of a wheel of color or a wheel of sun or natural color that were present during the month of July. And at the top, you see where the blue meets the pink, it created this purple color. And I thought, oh, yeah, that's a little bit of an intruder here. I hadn't observed the purple in the environment. So I was debating if the purple had its place, what should I do with it? So part of my exploration was questioning this purple color. So you see me using the pigment here. So I normally use a very limited amount of pigment. There was one blue, one pink, one orange, one yellow, and a lead white for this particular series of paintings. And you also see that I'm collecting a certain amount of information about the mix that I'm creating. So I call these painting swatches. So they're my reference of color. So as I'm mixing the color, I keep a little swab of that color just to make sure that if I need to reproduce it in the future, I'll have a documentation of it. And you also see the painting in relationship to the gradients that is produced by the gel installed in the window. And you really see the strong relationship now from the color that I'm using in my paintings to the color that are being cast by the light, the sun going through the gels that are installed in the window. So here I'm starting to work on the composition very slowly. I'm creating these bands of color. These are gridded. So I'm using a 4 inches by 7 inches grid and using the diagonal lines of the grid, I'm able to create these light intrusion paths that I refer to as for this series of painting. And I'm painting them kind of loosely. I don't really have a specific plan in mind. I'm trying to test color and composition at this point. And you'll see the evolution of these paintings. So these paintings are painted over about a month. I have to wait about 24 hours in between painting each of the layers so the pigment can dry. And you see how these pieces come together as the time go by. So they're really becoming their own as I am building them over time. And now you see them stretch with the wall all cleaned up and installed in the studio as it is today and will be for the open studio. So this is the more final state of these painting studies. The same thing happened for the larger piece, but because there was so much color in that piece, I wanted to keep the composition a little bit more simpler. So I only did two paths of light intrusion or this parallelogram shape. And I also use white in that context. And the white, unfortunately, a little bit hard to document, is using both a glossy and a matte finish. So when you are experiencing these work live in presence, depending on how you look at it, the angle of view, your body movement, you will experience what I refer to as dynamic viewing, which will kind of like invite you to move around the work and really see how this work changed depending on your viewing angle and how it plays with the light and is in relationship with the light. So you see another version of the large piece, which is now stretched and installed in the studio next to the painting swatches. And then at the end of July, early August, I got to experience this sunset. And it really confirmed for me where that purple was coming from. So it's when the sun goes below the horizon and reflects back into the blue sky, then this purple is formed. And I was really excited to see that because I thought, okay, like it's not an intruder, it's actually there, but I hadn't been able to identify it yet. So maybe it was, I had seen it in the sky prior to that specific evening, but because that question was in my mind, when I saw it that evening, I just got like a conclusion that I was like, okay, it's not an intruder, it's really part of the environment. So the small painting study helped me identify what I will be doing for the large canvas. We are now in early August. Each of my painting, I want to say that they are in between 3 to 5 coats of gesso. So doing the gesso also takes a little bit of time. I have to sand in between each of the layers. So I normally install the piece and it takes me a couple of weeks before I can get started. So by then we're in August. And what happened in early August is that, I don't know if you remember, we had a couple of overcast days, oh my God, and a couple of days of rain. So the ambiance of August is shifting. And the day that I painted this particular gradient, it was actually an overcast day. So you see it's a little bit of dim light in the studio, and somehow it impacted how I painted that initial foundation color. The color were a little bit more dim. The gradient is a little softer. Everything feels feels slightly different and way less saturated than the beginning of July, where the color were very saturated. The forest is really green, the grass are green, everything is very lush because we're the beginning of the summer. And by the time August rolled in, the ambiance changes slightly. Everything is kind of shifting towards a different phase of the summer. And of course, as we are, you see the grid here is finely finished painting. And you also notice that this is a very soft light quality. You see the gradient on the floor created by the gel, but there's no defined line. It's not overly saturated. So I felt that this particular day kind of dictates the tone, the tonality of that large canvas. There's something also that happened is that it started to, my experience of biking around, going to the studio, and my relationship to the sun and the summer started to shift, because we all know that Vancouver was very dry this summer, very hot this summer. So it started to become a little bit more challenging to think about only the beauty of the sun and the beauty of the summer without kind of realizing that it comes with many challenges. The grasses are really dry at this point. The trees are starting to be very dry and kind of warp. The leaves are kind of turning. The atmosphere is different. The wildfire are going crazy. There's smoke in the environment. So this started to enter my mind, and I started to think about that and realize also when I go to the McKay Creek, the water is receding, the shore a lot more exposed. You feel that there's this dryness. So I felt like it needed to switch the color slightly and do another piece to address this change. So what I did is I used the same 4 pigments, but I mixed them in a different way and a different ratio to create this brown and khaki, because I really felt that that was the color that was becoming more dominant as opposed to these beautiful blues and saturated yellows of the early summer. So note that not that visible on the digital documentation, there's also this piece is really matte. So it's really absorbing the light. It is not reflecting the light. So you see them in combination of the two. So the soft gradient and the brown piece next to it on the wall of the residency. And you see this image compared to the soft light I was showing you earlier is on a very sunny day, where you see that the sunny day gives me really sharp definition of the gradient of the grid created by the gel in the window. And it's slightly different than what I'm finding in the large piece, which is a lot softer light that was dictated by an overcast day. So here's the evolution of these two last pieces. The brown piece is 36 by 40. The large piece is 72 by 58. So quite large formats. And you see the last stage of it. And when I took the photos here, the painting were still wet. So the reflection is slightly different. This piece is mostly matte. There is a series of bands that are using a glossy finish, but mostly the painting is matte, whereas the larger piece has larger area of glossy finish. And you see the studio in here with the two pieces completed and drying. So for the open studio, because my project at the Griffin residency included first a research, which I've discussed, a series of painting, which I've now concluded. And now I'm moving into the last phase of the residency, which is an installation that will be in relationship to that research. So the installation will include the landing, which I've mentioned earlier, the contrast from studio 1 and 2 that will serve as a transition, the colored gels in the window, and a series of painting. So here's the landing as you will experience it as you walk in the residency and you go up. And I see this as a way to transition, maybe give you a chance to kind of shed your thoughts of your day, maybe the fact that you have to go to a meeting after, you have just a little bit of time and you're a little bit in a hurry. You walk in and maybe this perceptual transition allows you to kind of maybe empty your mind and let go and maybe prepare you to enter this more a space in your mind that allows you to perceive things better and have a bit more sensitivity towards light, color, and ambiance of the studio that I'm recreating through this transition. Then you will experience the first studio, and maybe in fact that you'll be in the bluer light, you'll see the invitation of the pinkish light that will be glowing in studio number 2. Then you'll experience the gels in the window, and perhaps if it's sunny that day, the light paths and the gradient that it's creating and casting on the floor of the residency. And then you'll see the installation that I will have created. The brown piece and the larger piece will be stretched for the event. I'm hoping they'll be dry and stretched on time, and they'll be installed properly in the studio. And yeah, and I wanted to end with the fact that because we're in August now, the sunsets are becoming quite different. You start to see a lot of this quite orangey red in the environment, also caused by the smoke that is coming in from the wildfire. And if anybody on this talk today is affected by the wildfire, I'm very sorry for what we are going through, and my heart goes to you for all the challenges that it might create. And also you see in the photo that the grass is really brown at this point, especially at sunset. So the early twilight of the July season feels quite different at this point in time in August. Also, when I'm able to stay later at night, we are experiencing at the end of August what I call the golden light. So sunsets that are a lot more yellow and orangey in atmosphere. So I'm able to document this really yellow light that's coming in the studio in the late evening. So you see a second image here where the light is really yellow, which is something that happens naturally in August. So I'm very happy to have been able to share this information with you. There's more information on my website. You can follow me on my Instagram. I tend to post a lot of in-progress images. You can also see the video that I presented today in the chat on my YouTube channel, and there's a few more coming in. I've recorded one last night of the golden light that I just show you the image. And you can also see some of my work at the Vancouver Art Gallery Art Rental and Sell program, which is something new if you want to see some of my work in Vancouver. So if you have any question, I'd be happy to answer them and discuss further.
Yeah, thank you, Marion. Thank you so much for the generous share. And just a reminder for the audience, please feel free to drop your question in the Q&A dialog box, which is right at the bottom of your screen. While you get started typing, I just have a question for you. And of course, like just, again, thank you so much for this generous share about your practice and the embodied research that you do, like from seating to sensing, walking, biking, seeing, and the close observation, not only of the studio space, but also the surroundings. You showed so many places that I didn't know were so near us. And it's wonderful to see that this research comes with you. As you said, it's not like sitting down, going through books. It's part of it, but it's also going out and seeing, and it's also wonderfully related to the weather, related to the season, and with that, like the climate emergency that we're living through, the wildfires, like all these reflections come to mind. And there's something that you mentioned that quite touched me when you mentioned that this is an invitation for people to, like an invitation to sensitivity, to being able to be with the research and feel this. And I find in your work there's a balance or like an equilibrium of the beauty of the sun, as you were saying, but also the reflection of what we're going through. So how do you find this balance? Like, how do you, incorporate your embodied research to what is, like unfolding currently?
Yeah, what I find interesting is that my work is really seasonal. So there's no way I could have painted this series in October. In October, the season is changed, the environment has changed, the trees are different, like the ambiance is different, the light quality is different. So it's really in relationship to what I'm experiencing. And of course, I am attracted by geometrical shapes. So maybe I notice those shapes more in the environment than the organic shapes, for example. But they were so prominent in terms of my experience of going through the residency. Like I was saying, I'm like using this narrow path and I'm squeezed in by the two private land around me, and I can only kind of go through this narrow environments to get through the residency. So the way that I navigate it is that it gets into my mind. I think it's mostly unconscious. I think it arrives, it takes over, and it just gets translated into how I start sketching. The first iteration of the painting is always done with sketches. Somehow there's something very immediate about a sketch that I can kind of resolve. There's many more sketches that I didn't show in terms of composition, of line, of effect that I'm after. And then, you know, I'm in the studio and I come in and there's this beautiful light spectrum that I'm experiencing through the installation of the gel. And of course, as I'm biking and I could see the smoke coming in and the grass are drying, just the whole experience affects me. It affects how I feel. So it affects what I want to paint in the studio. So somehow I was looking at my early painting and I thought, oh, it's becoming way too saturated. I can't really paint this way anymore. It kind of happens naturally. I get there in my own time. And it was interesting because the large painting, I stretch it by mid-July. I gesso it. It was ready to paint for a while and I did not know what would come of it. I did not know what I would be painting. And it's really the morning that I start painting that the transition happened. And it's a result of this embodied research and embody of sensing, of being in, of really kind of like observing the now, what's happening now, and kind of responding to that as opposed to planning a painting in advance and painting it.
Yes, of course, because you were mentioning what you named dynamic viewing of like people like being able to like, you know, if you move, you will see different parts of the painting. And I love this idea of like how you wait, like there's a temporality to your paintings. There's something informing, you know, day to day, how you show up in the studio. And will you say that for this dynamic viewing, is this something that can be achievable outside of the studio? Is this something that you yourself experiment while you're doing your embodied research?
Yeah, I think so. I think so very much. And I think that happens a lot around water. You know, when I was spending time with the McKay Creek, at first, the first time I took the path along the McKay Creek, I took it on my bike and I thought, oh, this is way too fast, I can't see. So I had to go back on foot and actually walk to the water, walk to the shore of the water, sit down by the water, look at the water from down below, look at the water from above. And then there's a section where there's a little bridge that goes above the water. So I went and looked at the water with the shadow of the bridge, came back on another time of the day and see how that water felt. And it was the McKay Creek, I guess the foundation of it is mostly rocks and some dirt. So it read as really brown, but there's so much green and blue sky around it that if I was looking at it from high above, it was reading as blue. But the minute I was to the shore of it and looking at it from up close or from my shadow, I could see the ground of it and being brown. So I think that's something that I do naturally in the environment when I'm observing and really trying to understand what I'm looking at, and therefore is being the same invitation is there in my painting as well.
That is so beautiful. Thank you so much. We have a couple of questions in our Q&A. You can read them from there. I'm just gonna say them out loud for captioning purposes.
Okay.
So let's start with Judy. So Judy says, does Marion recommend against framing these works?
No, I don't have any opinion on it, to be honest. I think that my smaller work, I've seen it frame before on a floating frame. So there's something that you have to understand is that there's a lot of mark making on the side, on the edges of my stretchers. And a lot of people get attached to that because there's some sort of information. Sometimes you see arrows, sometimes you see numbers, sometimes you see writing. And I leave it apparent. I don't try to hide it. And if you own one of my paintings, often you'll see in the back of the stretcher some more information, just like what pen color I use, which pigment color I use from which brand, information like that. They're technical information for me, but I kind of leave them included in the stretcher. So if you frame the work, you might lose some of that information. So most people don't end up framing the work, but I have seen some of my work frame, and sometimes it's also really beautiful because depending on your wall, maybe you do need that extra boundary to kind of limit the stretcher. But I always recommend a floating frame so you can still see the edge of the canvas as opposed to closing in and really hiding the edge of the canvas. That would be my recommendation if you're thinking about framing the work.
And to continue with Judy, and then I guess we'll wrap it up with Shayla. Folks, if you have more questions, please feel free to put it on the Q&A dialog box. And Judy again and asks, how will a darker gesso affect the result?
That's interesting because so when I painted the large formats, which is behind me, I actually used a pink gesso. So pink gesso is sometime I use that to, so when I paint, my paint is very thinly applied. So it has a level of transparency. Because it has a level of transparency, if I paint on the white normal gesso, the tonality of the color is affected by the white. So it will be really bright and luminescent. When I tint the gesso, when I tint the gesso to a light pink, it gives it this kind of different luminescence and different glow. And sometimes you will see in some instance, you'll be able to perceive this kind of glow, pinky glow behind the paint itself. So that's something that I used to do, that I've done in the past before when I'm trying to mimicate the effect of light, because the light in the studio was quite pinkish, so I wanted it to be present in the work. Using a dark gesso, I haven't done in many years, but I did a series of landscape studies when I was in Florence, Italy. And in that case, I was using a very intense orange gesso as, well, it was an orange oil color that I start my composition with. And the reason for that is because if you've been to Florence, Italy, the light there is very much orange. So it's very apparent in the landscape and the reflection of the glass in the stone, like everything is so orangey that it became part of the composition of the painting as well. So I would say that it would definitely impact the results. I haven't used a darker gesso, so I wouldn't be able to speak about that, but definitely the impact would be different and something to explore depending on what you're trying to achieve.
Thank you. And now from Sheila, she's asking, thank you, Marion. Have you ever experienced and or worked with the prismatic light that is projected on a wall due to passing through beveled glass or hanging crystal? I have many photos of this phenomenon on my white walls.
Yes, I like that a lot. I've never painted it directly, but it's something that I'm always mesmerized by and something that's very present in my mind. And I think somewhat present in the first medium format that I did with the purple that I was questioning about. This idea of the prism in the composition is definitely there. And the crystal, I've had a lot of conversation about that with other people. And also the fact that it's glossy and matte and has this kind of iridescence effect when you're kind of moving around the paint, the canvas. So I think it's there, it's in my mind. It's not a direct translation, but it's definitely something that I think about and something that I often experiment when looking at water. So you'll see it cast sometime around water reflection, like on the leaves, on the bark of the trees, stuff like that. So yes, definitely something that I'm quite interested in.
I really love when you mention the purple being an intruder. And I think will be part of the next question by Ingrid. Ingrid is asking, well, thank you, Marion, fabulous talk. Intrigued by your term light intrusion. Any further thoughts about that?
Yeah, thanks, Ingrid. Nice to see that you're here. I don't see who's on the talk, unfortunately, but it's nice to see from the question who are there. I was thinking about light intrusion because to me, when I first arrive at the studio, it's 10 a.m. and there's no light yet in the studio. There is natural light that comes from ambient lights. So the studio is quite dark. And the minute the light come in the studio and start lighting up the floor, the whole studio changed. So the ambiance changed, the quality of the light changed. It became more warm and very much present, even though it wasn't on the wall, it was just bouncing off the floor and the floor is gray. It was actually making a big impact. So that's why I kind of refer to as intrusion. It kind of came in and really marked itself and really kind of intruded in the day and kind of went like, hello, I'm here. You know, you should pay attention to me. So it was so drastic, the change, that it felt like it was an intrusion coming in from the window. So that's kind of how I refer to it. And that's how I went to that specific shape as well, which was cast from the shadow of, from the light intrusion of the sun from the window and cast on the floor. And you can't show it right. I can't show it right now, but on the floor, I ended up tracing the marks of this shape to really kind of understand what kind of angle, what's the size I was working with. And that's how I came up with the 4x7 grid that I want to work with. It felt like the proportion was very similar to what I was observing from the light on the floor that I was tracing.
And maybe a great way to wrap the Q&A. I'm very curious. Judy is back. Another question. Judy asks, do you use titles that indicate the sources in your walks? I will add, how do you title your, add, like, how do you title your works?
I haven't titled the work yet. For now, the blue piece is called Blue and Yellow and Orange and Pink. You know, that's more kind of a reference for me. But I had an interesting conversation with Lisa Baldessera from the Griffin Arts project here, the director. She came for a studio visit on Friday, and we had a conversation about that, about the title and how I can title my work to the phenomena of the natural world, or the documentation of the day, or the specificity of the day. So I don't know yet what I'll do with the title. Normally, I try to keep the title very generic and open, because I don't want to necessarily narrate a specific story, but I want to leave space for the viewer to kind of interpret the work the way that they want. So I will give them hints, but not necessarily direct translation. I don't want to tie the painting to a specific walk, because I don't know that it has that specificity. I think the series has more to do with a specific time and space. That's kind of more how I would think of it, but I haven't titled it yet. So I don't know which shape or form it's going to take at this point. The title normally, sometimes they come in while I'm painting. I get really clear about specific title. Sometimes it takes time. Sometimes it takes conversation. For now, I think it's going to take conversation, because I haven't come up with the title yet. So I'm hoping that I come up with a system to name them that relates back to this specific July 2023 and this specific time that we had, and the specificity of the summer, because every summer is slightly different. And this summer was quite particular. So I would like to tie it to the condition of the summer for sure.
I really love that discussion on naming, because it is very inviting, just as the dynamic viewing that you are proposing, like having folks immerse themselves based on a title, but just gently guided, as opposed to, this is, you know, what I saw, and therefore you must experience it that way. It is very thoughtful, and I'm so thankful for your presentation and your time with us at Griffin. And folks who attended, if you want to see this in person, if you have suggestions for titles, please join Marion on August 27th. That will be in a week on Sunday at Griffin Art Projects. Anika is going to put the link there for you to the event, so you know where to go. August 27th, starting noon to 5 p.m. You can see Marion's work, all the work that she showed you. There will also be another artist, the one in Studio One, who's Jing-Woo Kang, and curator Bernard Lebob. So we'll hope to see you there. And Marion, do you have any goodbyes to say before we say our
I
outro?
just wanted to say thank you to everybody who attended. Either you see it live or you watch it later. So I want to thank you for your time and your support. It's always great to have an audience and a community from which I can discuss and engage with. That's a very important part of my work. So I want to say thank you for being here, and hopefully we get to connect in person.
That'll be wonderful. And Anika's gonna do the outro. So Anika, please join us. And for my part, thank you everyone for joining us. Marion, if you can stop sharing screen, and then we'll just transition into the goodbyes. Okay, Anika, I'm pinning you. Take it away.
Thank you everyone for joining us today for Live from the Studio with Griffin and Emily Carr University Studio Award recipient Marion Landry. We hope to see you in our next event live with August Curator in Residence, Bernard Lebob. You can find the link to the event page and all of the following links in the chat box. A reminder that our gallery Griffin Art Projects is showing an exhibition Per Diem Part 2, the Gerd Metzdorf collection, until August 27th. We are open Friday through Sunday, noon to 5 p.m. If you would like to know more about Griffin Art Projects, you can subscribe to the newsletter at the bottom of our website. Thank you everyone for coming. We hope to see you again.
Thank you, everyone.